Thanks for joining us all. We appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to join us here. I want to introduce Carlos Sanchez. He's going to be leading this Zoom today. He's a longtime guide with Naturalist Journeys, lots of experience in South America, birding, and he's going to just dive a little deeper into our Ecuador and Pantanal tours in Brazil. And we also have Greg Butcher in attendance as well. Greg's going to be guiding the Ecuador tour, the Chocó Galore tour. So, Carlos, you want to take it away and get started?
Sure. So let me introduce myself. Actually, let's let Greg introduce himself first, and then I'll segue into my introduction.
My name is Greg Butcher. I am a recent retiree from U.S. Forest Service international programs, and I was lucky to hook up with Naturalist Journeys, and they have offered me a chance to lead enough tours. I don't tell people I'm retired anymore. I'm now a tour guide. And I was able to work in conservation in South America, and now I'm pleased to lead a bunch of tours down there. In October, I was in Peru. In next month in March, I'll be in Argentina. And then the Ecuador tour we'll talk a little bit more about is in August this year, a 10-day tour to the Chocó region in northwest Ecuador. And then in November, I'll be leading a tour to Bolivia. So Naturalist Journeys offers tours to 9 different countries in South America, and of course, all over the world. And I'm looking forward to learn more about the Pantanal tours from Carlos.
Okay, so let me introduce myself. My name is Carlos Sanchez. I've been working as a guide for Naturalist Journeys since 2016. I have pretty much my entire life I've had a deep association with most of Latin America. I grew up in Miami. My dad was Cuban, my mom Italian. I grew up surrounded by Colombians, Ecuadorians, Brazilians, Argentines. They've always been a part of my life. We celebrate parties together, birthdays, everything. So almost like an intimate knowledge of these various countries, more so than just birding, but on a cultural level. In this presentation, we're going to do a double header. I will be focusing mostly on Brazil. There is just so much to say about both of these countries, but I have a lot to say about Brazil. But then we'll finish off with Ecuador, which is an incredibly rich country. And the Chocó region actually complements Brazil very, very well. There's almost no species overlap. The habitats are completely different. So I work for Brazil. I worked in Cristalino Lodge in 2013 in the Brazilian Amazon. So I spent about 4 months working in the Brazilian Amazon as a guide. And that's actually what jump-started my guiding career, working for companies such as Naturalist Journeys. I have since done 8 more trips to Brazil. I've been to the Caatinga in the Northeast. I've been to the Southeast. And I've been to the Pantanal many, many times. And I'm slated to go back. So let's start this. So let's put into context this country, this giant south of North America. Brazil covers 2/3 of South America. In land area, it's as big as the lower 48, or if you think about it, it's as big as India plus all of Southeast Asia combined. Oh. It is an enormous country. And like the United States, it's a country of immigrants. It's received between 4 to 5 million immigrants, mostly from Italy, Portugal, Japan, and Germany. Actually has the second largest population of Germans outside of Germany, together with former African slaves and indigenous people, and basically formed the Brazilian national identity. And so when you go to Brazil, it is truly a melting pot of cultures, of people and culture. It's an exciting place to visit, just culturally. Ecologically, it's it's just an incredible place with superlatives. So it is the third most biodiverse country in the world in terms of bird life, with 1,800 bird species. About 240 or so are endemic, which is more than any other country in North America. That's because there's a lot of birds endemic to this ribbon of green here. This is called the Mata Atlântica, the Atlantic rainforest. And so most of the endemics are here. So on the Naturalist Journeys tour, we actually have a pre-extension that comes to right about here, right in the heart of it, and you spend a few days sort of sampling the Atlantic rainforest of Brazil. The meat of the tour covers the Pantanal here in the pink. And then just about more or less around here is the city of Cuiabá, the largest city you've never heard of. It's most people are surprised. It's covered in skyscrapers and such when you're landing. It's quite a large city. And Chapada dos Guimarães is an island of Cerrado. It's a massif right over here, and you get to see sort of the Cerrado habitat, which is highly endangered, highly biodiverse, another amazing eco-region of Brazil. So let's start off with the Mata Atlântica, the pre-tour. This beautiful little bird is a green-headed tanager, one of the many Atlantic rainforest tanagers, all incredibly colorful. So we visit Itatiaia National Park. It's the oldest national park in Brazil. It was established, I believe, in 1973. It protects a piece of the Atlantic rainforest, which is unfortunately extremely highly endangered. Only about, actually, it's less than 10% now. It's about 8% of the Atlantic rainforest still remains. However, surprisingly, most of the ecosystem's bird life is actually intact. There's only been 1 or 2 extinctions so far in the Atlantic rainforest, which is incredible. They theorize that part of this is due to the fact that during the ice ages, the Atlantic rainforest expanded and contracted many times. So many of the birds here are used to populating very small pockets of moist forest, because during the ice age, the Atlantic rainforest was much drier than it is today, and the Cerrado was much larger. So here's your lodge, those chalets there of Swiss appearance. That's Hotel do Ipé. One of the first wave of immigrants to reach Brazil were from Switzerland, along with the Germans, and they established a lot of their architecture in the mountains. So, such as Hotel do Ipé. This beautiful lodge also has excellent feeders, which we'll look at later. There's excellent birding trails all around. You usually see about 150 or so bird species just in a couple days. One of the most exciting days for most of our groups is visiting what they call the Agulhas Negras Road. So you go out of the park and you actually climb up in elevation. It's all relative, right? This isn't the Andes, so we're climbing up to about 4,500, 5,000 feet in elevation. And it is quite cold up there during the time that we visit. It is winter, but it is still cloud forest, still montane forest, still full of all the colorful tanagers and black-capped proprieties and all the wonderful birds that we like to look for in these areas. There's also patches of araucaria forest, or you might know them as monkey puzzle trees, which have endemic birds such as the Itatiaia spinetail and the araucaria tit spinetail. And we actually go above tree line where we have a nice picnic. Quite sunny up there. So right around the lodge grounds, there's excellent photographic opportunities at Hotel do Ipé. This is just a small sampling of what shows up. magpie tanager, white-throated hummingbird, dusky-legged guan, saffron toucanets may often make an appearance, black-goggled tanager, green-headed tanagers. I mean, you can literally take videos with your iPhone. They're really close. And it's really wonderful to spend time there just seeing the sort of 20 to 25 bird species parading around the lodge. And this is our group. I believe this was our group in 2019, enjoying, this was right after a picnic lunch at the end of Agulhas Negras Road, or above tree line here. So we'll continue onward from the Atlantic rainforest. This is the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is the world's largest wetland. It's a seasonally flooded wetland. It's extremely productive. It basically develops, as you see the Paraguay River, which runs more or less right along this edge here with the border of Bolivia, overflows its banks and basically floods this entire region. This entire region is a bit larger, actually, than the country of Portugal. And it's another amazing place. It's a mosaic of habitats. We transect the Pantanal via what they call the Transpantaneira Highway. It's a dusty road, a bumpy road. It goes over lots of rickety bridges. Sometimes you just sort of close your eyes and hope that your vehicle is not the one that sort of broke the camel's back, so to speak. And they are changing them, by the way. Last year I was there, they are starting to change a lot of them out, so that's a good thing, because they were getting a little dicey. But again, the Transpantaneira Highway is an amazing birding road, one of the great birding roads of the world, I believe. The habitat shifts from north to south, and that is why we stay at different lodges along the length of the Transpantaneira. So in this image, this is Posada Pival. It's the last lodge that we stay at. It's in the north end, and actually this is one of the few lodges in Pantanal that does not close during the rainy season. The rainy season being from late October through June. So we actually, all Pantanal tours will go July, August, September, early October. Posada Pival is a working cattle ranch, as are many of the lodges along the Pantanal. This particular one has really good seasonally dry forest, and has what they call some Chocó influence. So there's some species here that are more typical of the Argentinian Chocó and also the Paraguayan Chocó. So here's a typical scene of the Pantanal. This is a herd of capybara. So this is a scene of capybaras. This is near South Wild Pantanal, the second lodge that we stay at while we're visiting. And they're just crossing, just basically a typical scene. You get really close views of the capybaras here, the world's largest rodents. Of course, another big reason for everyone to come to the Pantanal is to see the waders. Here are some examples of them: sunbittern, capped heron, and jabiru. So basically, as one of the reasons you visit during the dry season is that a lot of these birds nest and migrate to these seasonally flooded wetlands during the dry season as the water is coming down, much like in the Everglades, but on a grander scale. So as the water concentrates all the fish, the birds basically have a food bonanza. And testament to that productivity. If you have a large population of jabiru, which I believe the Pantanal has the largest population of jabiru stork in the world, it's because the habitat is hyper productive. If people have had difficulty seeing sun bitterns, and maybe in Costa Rica or in Ecuador, the Pantanal, they're much more common there. I've never done a tour where you haven't seen multiples of them. They're much more common, much easier to see in the Pantanal than elsewhere in their range. And of course, the capped heron is just gorgeous. And there's just so many more birds, and there's lots of kingfishers. You usually see all the neotropical kingfishers on a given tour. Here's an American pygmy kingfisher, which pose nicely. You usually try for green and rufous. Amazon green and ringed are usually quite common. The center bird is a red-legged Seriema, a classic bird of Brazilian open country. Distantly related to the terror birds, giant predatory birds that used to inhabit South America before the great extinction of megafauna in the Americas. Red-legged Seriema is a little cousin. Still a big bird, about 3 feet tall, acts a lot like a secretary bird. And the last one, an Agami heron, often considered one of the most beautiful herons in the world. Long rapier-like bill, just very special to see, quite shy. Lots of seed feeders in the Pantanal, bringing in a lot of color, such as this red-crested cardinal, flocks of saffron finches, often flocks of yellow-billed cardinals in numbers that basically, with the white, red, and blue of their back, it almost looks like the French flag when they're like lined up and en masse on the ground. And then, of course, a lot of people really love seeing scarlet-headed blackbird, another wonderful bird, a bit more specialized. That does not come to feeders. That'll be in extensive reed beds, and we usually see maybe a couple on any given tour. There's a few select places to see them, but just another wonderful species. I think the highlight bird, though, for many people coming to the Pantanal is the hyacinth macaw. So in the 1980s, the hyacinth macaw population had dropped to only about 1,500 individuals. And due to conservation efforts in the Pantanal, working with private ranchers and basically installing nest cavities in the trees that they like. They like 80% of nests are on the manduvi trees, and they like to feed on a particular palm nut called the acuri. And in the Pantanal, they've been supplied with these food and nesting, with the food source in these nesting boxes to bolster the population. The Pantanal currently holds by far the largest share of the entire world population of these amazing birds, largest flying parrot in the world, about 5,000. And then mammals, lots of wonderful mammals in the Pantanal. This is just a small sampling of various species: South American tapir, giant otter, and giant anteater. All birds high on people's lists to see. Good chances for all of them. The giant anteater being maybe the most difficult, but we do make a specific effort for that one. And of course, as we go to South Wild Pantanal, there is usually an ocelot that comes to a feeding station. It's probably the best way to see an ocelot clearly in the wild, other than just bumping into one. Some people don't like it, but it is pretty neat to see an animal that well. It is a wild animal. And then, of course, the major target for a lot of people going to the Pantanal is the jaguar. And the jaguar is the easiest place to see it in the world is from Porto Jofre in the extreme south of the Pantanal. Um, there are people in radio contact. It's not about whether you see a jaguar during your stay. It's about how many jaguars you see during your stay. And if you like photography, it is really a treat. Last year, we witnessed a jaguar jump into the water, swim across. We didn't know what was going on. It actually, and suddenly we heard thrashing. It had caught a caiman the same size as the jaguar. And I was like just in awe, just could not believe this jaguar is tackling this caiman that was as big as it was. And it killed it within less than 10 minutes. It just completely overpowered it. So very powerful creature. Beautiful creature. So some closing notes on the Pantanal. If you have any reservations about the Pantanal in terms of ease, it's a very easy place to visit. It's not a long part of the tour. It's only about 10 to 11 days. Terrain is very flat, and it's the walking is not intense. There's no elevation. It's pretty much flat walking. A lot of boat trips. It's a really nice trip. It's more open country. There are a lot of targets of smaller birds, but there's also a lot of larger birds to look for, and it makes for a really nice mix of species. And just being there is just amazing. So we move on to the extension, Chapada dos Guimarães. So when I first landed in Brazil in 2013, the first place that I went to was this particular lodge in Chapada dos Guimarães. It's called Pousada do Parque, and it's actually owned by the same owner in 2013 is still the owner now. So it's really nice to see him and to see him every year, and yeah, hopefully see him this year again. So Chapada dos Guimarães is basically an old red sandstone massif. It's a plateau, ancient geologically. And in the background, you can hear macaws, red and green and blue-winged macaw. And that's the Bridal Veil Fall or Verde Noiva waterfall, a cachoeira. Brazilians love waterfalls, by the way. It's a deep part of their culture and national psyche, the cachoeira. So not just scenery, but a lot of wonderful birds to look for here in Chapada dos Guimarães. The cerrado here is called Cerrado Rupestre. This discussion, I can't provide you a deep enough explanation of cerrado, but it's basically tropical savanna. And Cerrado Rupestre is basically a sort of a woodland ecosystem with small amount of grass, lots of gnarled, fire-resistant trees, almost like a tropical chaparral type habitat. And it's habitat for white-rumped tanagers and white-eared puffbird and just collared crescent chest. And then there's these Vale do Jamacá and Vale da Bença have basically they're moist canyons with sort of a more Amazonian bird species. So that's where you're going to see you can see channel-billed toucan and red-necked woodpecker, Amazonian motmot. There's sort of Amazonian influence into these forest types, rufous-tailed jacamar, the woodpecker. the Cerrado basically is what forms the barrier between the Atlantic rainforest and the Amazonian rainforest. And it's created this division within the country of the two moist biomes. And within the Cerrado, there are pockets of moister forests. And depending on how far they are from the sort of rainforest biomes is basically what dictates what moist forest species actually occur in these moist forest patches. It's really biogeographically fascinating, wonderful, just wonderful to be there. And there are a few mammals there. This cute little guy is a Brazilian guinea pig. They live right around the lodge at Posada do Parque. Cute little guy, probably food for roadside hawks. So now that we've covered Brazil, now we're gonna move on to Ecuador, the Chocó region. I have been to Ecuador also many times. I actually was a guide in Ecuador in 2010 at Bella Vista Lodge. Sort of just went there. This was before going to Brazil. Sort of just went there, just a guide, have a bit of fun, look at some birds, see what it was like before I went to work in the real world, so to speak, which didn't last very long. So this here is a plate-billed mountain toucan, one of the many incredible birds that you can see in this part of Ecuador, the northwestern part of Ecuador, the Chocó region. So Ecuador. So if Brazil is a giant, Ecuador is much, much, much smaller. But don't let the size fool you. Despite its small size, about the size of Oregon, it packs a lot of species in that tiny space due to the Andes. With about 1,600 bird species, and the Chocó rainforest, which is this sort of light purple patch on the northwest part of this map, that's the Chocó. That's about 600 bird species, or about 40% more or less, about a little over a third of the bird species of Ecuador occur here. So if you loved your big birds in Brazil, your macaws, your puffbirds, your jacamars, toucans, Ecuador is none of those things. But what it lacks in macaws and puffbirds, it makes up with tanagers and hummingbirds. Just enormous diversity. And if you really love hummingbirds, this is the place for you. Hummingbirds reach their zenith here. 130 species of hummingbird occur in the country of Ecuador. That's out of 300 species. That's an enormous percentage. And not just numbers, it's the diversity that's present. So on this tour in the Chocó, by visiting the various elevational ranges, you will see things like sword-billed hummingbird, giant hummingbird, various kind of puffleg, incas, velvet breasts, wood nymphs, just a kaleidoscope of sapphires and emeralds and wood stars, and just hummingbirds with crests and puffy legs and rackets, and just everything you could imagine on a hummingbird, it's there. A tour in northwest Ecuador, you should see between 50 to 60 species of hummingbird quite easily by just visiting the feeders at various elevations, which we do on our tour. Another huge part of birding in Ecuador are the mixed feeding flocks. So mixed feeding flocks are a huge portion of birding here. Usually you'll see flocks of mountain tanagers in the higher elevations with various other tanagers, foliage gleaners, wrens, wood creepers, tufted cheeks. As you go lower in elevation, some of those species fall out. You lose the mountain tanagers, but you gain many, many more smaller tanagers, such as flame-faced tanager, black cap tanager, glistening green tanager, just a huge variety of species to see, a lot of color. Another treat to see on our tour is the Angel Pass Nature Reserve. So the Angel Pass Nature Reserve sort of was begun by Angel Paz. So Angel Paz basically, he used to hunt the birds. He was a farmer, and he used to hunt the birds with a slingshot. Until one day, I believe a bird watcher actually told him, you know, people like to see these, and you can make money by showing people these birds. So he actually started feeding worms to the ant pittas specifically. This one here that you see on the far right is a giant ant pitta. He calls the giant ant pittas Maria. It's at this point, it's not the original Maria that started the whole thing. This is probably Maria the 17th or whatever number. It may be at this point, but going to Angel Pass is really a real treat. So you get to see giant ant pitta. You get to see potentially, not all of them show up every time, yellow-breasted ant pitta, chestnut naped ant pitta, chestnut crowned ant pitta, dark-backed wood quail. A lot of these birds are very difficult to see under normal circumstances. So to be able to have the privilege of seeing these birds in the wild, almost at your feet, is really, really special. And this method of feeding ant pittas has been so successful that now it's done throughout the Andes. So you can go to the Santa Marta region of Colombia. You can go to Jardín. You can go to northwestern Peru. All ant pittas all along the Andes are being fed mealworms. They are no longer the phantoms they used to be. This particular genus, you can feed them and they do come, and a lot of people are getting to enjoy these birds that used to be impossible to see on a short visit. And I like to liken this, basically see these ant pittas as, they're basically species ambassadors. So people can only appreciate what they can see and what they can witness. So they're basically ambassadors to their species. Another thing you get to see at Angel Pas's reserve, he has a lek of Andean cock of the rock. In this part of their range, they tend to display fairly early in the morning, loud, noisy, lot of flapping of wings, just amazing birds. The reddish color it just glows. And they're quite big. They're about the size of a small crow. And so I like to end my presentation here with a photo of some of my group from 2019 here with Jabiru at the gas station. So in Brazil, as you go into the Pantanal, you notice that there's a lot of murals, a lot of paintings, a lot of statuary sort of celebrating their wildlife. And they do realize that the Pantanal and its mosaic of privately owned cattle ranches is a sustainable way to preserve the area's wildlife, while also providing a way of life for the locals that live there. So I'd like to open it up for questions now. I feel like people might have quite a few.
What's interesting about Natural Journey's approach to South America is that our trips are shorter than some other places. So the Ecuador trip is just 11 days, and many of these are 10-day to 2-week trips. And so you can take several trips to Ecuador and go visit different parts, and you don't have to do it all at one time. So it's really nice way to break up the birding so it doesn't get too overwhelming, because it's amazing the variety of things you'll see in 10 days to 2 weeks.
It's 1,600 species to choose from.
Yeah,
A bit overwhelming.
if you try to do 1,600 species at once, you might not remember the first ones by the time you did the last one. So immersing yourself for 10 days or 2 weeks, I think it's a really great way to do it. You might see 400 species, and I think that's much more manageable. And you come back with a really enjoyable experience, and hopefully a year or two later, you come back again.
So Ecuador is really worth about 3 trips. So you can easily do the Chocó region of Ecuador to begin with, which is a great way to sample a large variety of elevational ranges in the Northwest. And then after you do the West Slope, you can do a trip to the East Slope, you can do a trip to the Amazon, or you can do a trip that covers the Southern Ecuador. So it's really worth easily 3 to 4 trips. And you won't see 1,600 species even in those 4 trips. So no
Carlos, what do you
overwhelming.
think? What do you think, Carlos? 10 trips to Brazil should cover it?
Oh my goodness. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the thing about Brazil is you really need one big trip to the Northeast, one big trip to the Atlantic rainforest, and one trip to the Pantanal. But then you have the Cerrado, which needs at least 1 to 2, at least 2 trips. There's just no way to sample, and there's just so many amazing places. To see Brazilian mergansers, you go to Serra Canastra and you basically explore these crystal clear rivers in the middle of Cerrado, and you see this sort of grassland habitat plateau. The Amazon is different, and all the different regions are different. So there's just so much, just so much.
I know we've also had some questions about the political situation in Ecuador. Greg may be able to add a bit as well, but our local operator, Javier, lives in Quito in Ecuador. So he's very, abreast of what's happening at the moment. They're still running tours without any interruptions whatsoever. From what we're understanding, most of the unrest has been further south. This tour is entirely in the north. Of course, we'll be continuing to keep an eye on it, but as of now, things are looking like they're going ahead.
Are these 2 tours combined, or are they separate?
They're separate tours. We have the Ecuador Chocó tour is one tour, and then we actually have 3 Pantanal tours.
So even those Brazil tours are all separate. Is that correct?
Yes, so we have the Pantanal tours that have the optional extension to add. We have a few different departures of those. I'll go ahead and send a link to each one in the chat here.
Yeah, so there is a main Pantanal tour. So the Pantanal tour, you basically have about a 10 to 11 day main tour. And then the Cerrado portion is a post extension of about 3 full days. And the Atlantic rainforest is a pre-extension of about 3 days. So basically you have the option of making the trip a little longer on either end or both ends if you choose, or you could just do the Pantanal in of itself.
Are you going to be in the Pantanal at the time when the Jaguars are most likely to be seen?
All trips to the Pantanal will occur in the dry season. Jaguars will be present. I wouldn't worry about Jaguars. You'll see them.
So the one you said is the hardest is I've been to Pantanal twice and I still haven't seen anteaters.
Yeah, so giant anteater. So I've had pretty good luck seeing giant anteater, but no, it can be tricky. Giant anteater, the tour that Naturalist Journeys does goes to Mato Grosso do Sul. And so from out of Mato Grosso do Sul, there's Pousada Alegre, which basically is a very good place to see giant anteaters. There's a higher density of giant anteaters there. a fail-safe option, if it's not seen there, is at Posada Puval. I did see them at Puval last year. They are there.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're definitely on our bucket list. It's just a matter of time and money. We'll get back to you.
Sounds good.
It looks like there was also a question about what clothing to pack for the Pantanal tours. We do have a packing list on all of our landing pages for Brazil, but if either of you wanted to chime in on that, that would be great.
So don't make the mistake that I did, going to the Pantanal and thinking it was tropical shorts weather. So the year I went to the Pantanal in 2013, the temperature didn't go above 55 for 2 days. And it was snowing in southern Brazil. There were videos of it. And actually the event was so big, it's actually on Wikipedia now. So yes, there can be freak weather events that bring cold weather into Brazil. If you do the Atlantic rainforest of Brazil during July and August, it is quite cool to cold. I would definitely pack clothing for that. The Pantanal should be warm, but again, there could be freak weather events. I would come prepared.
And of course, for Ecuador, it's a huge elevation gradient, as Carlos was saying. You actually fly into the high elevation at the airport near Quito, and then we go down to a really low elevation as we head towards the Pacific Ocean. And so on the low elevation days, it could be really hot and humid. On the high elevation days, you're going to want your layers because it's all dependent on whether the sun is shining on you or not.
Hey, Carlos, Rick Wyman here. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Question is on the Pantanal stretch, do you spend any time actually sleeping on boats or they're just day boat trips?
Yes, you do. So on the Naturalist Journeys tour, I believe they still stay on basically it's a boathouse on the Cuiabá River. So the time that you're at Porto Jofre, you're actually on a flotel, as they say. And so you do get that experience.
So
And
it's like
how many-
a one
Sorry.
night thing. I'm sorry.
It's about 2 nights. It's 2
2
nights. Yeah.
Okay, it sounds pretty special.
And how many people are there on the trips relative to, is there one guide, 2 guides? And that looked like about 12 people. Is that the ratio?
Usually 2 guides. It's Javier and Naturalist Journeys tour leader.
The tours, the Pantanal tours would take a maximum of 10 people, and then that would be with 2 guides, a Naturalist Journeys guide and then our local guide as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Carlos, Ken Rose, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. I really enjoyed your talk. When do you recommend to go to Pantanal? What's the best time?
July, August, September. So it really depends on what you really want to see. But if you want to see jaguars, any of those months are fine. Some things are easier earlier in the season. If you really want to see Maguari stork in July, if you really want to see zigzag heron, early October is probably your safer bet. But really, any of those months, you'll see 99% of the same things will be occurring during that time period.
And during October as well, do you think?
Yeah, I would say the first week of October is safe. You do not want to be there when it's raining.
Right.
Any amount of rain will turn those dirt roads to just sludge.
Okay,
So you really want to be there in the dry season.
good. Well, you've convinced me we need to go to the Pantanal, so
Oh, everyone should go
Next-
to Pantanal.
the next fall, yeah, I think it's on our agenda. Thank you for the talk. Very nice.
In terms of photo opportunities, I'm assuming we wouldn't be sitting any place for extended periods of time, but bringing a camera would not be discouraged or would be discouraged?
I would bring your camera. No, absolutely.
Yeah, we have photographers on all our tours, and they come home with some amazing photos. And lately the guides have been helping the participants get digiscoping. So people that come with their iPhone are getting some great photos because they're looking through the telescopes and the guys are helping out. So everybody's coming home with really nice pictures from these tours.
Should you bring your own tripod or your own scope, or do you guys fly that?
I
You
think we're pretty well covered for telescopes. What do you think about for the photography, Carlos?
um, for photography, if they want to bring a tripod to be more serious about taking photos, they're more than welcome to. There's more than enough feeder opportunities where you can set up your camera and take photos at, for example, at Hotel do Ipe, or also the feeders at the various lodges in the Pantanal, or also in Ecuador. Northwest Ecuador is spoiled with feeder setups. There will be photographic opportunities. I don't think scopes would be necessary for these particular tours. I know for some other tours that Naturalist Journeys offers, having a scope is a good idea. For places like Spain, actually, is pretty good to have at least one more scope, or Thailand. There's a lot of shorebirds, but you don't have that concern here.
Thank you.
Do you do a nightly count going through species you saw for the day and keep a running list, or do you keep it, or do you do eBird, or how's that done?
You want to answer that, Greg?
Sure. Yeah, so I always keep an eBird list. Sometimes the local guide works with me hand in hand to do the eBird list. And then our tradition is to get together every evening, usually before dinner, go through the list, have something to whet the appetite, and have everybody review the day before we go out to dinner, because sometimes people are too tired after dinner. But yeah, we keep track of the birds. The eBird list, of course, is site by site. The evening compilation is day by day. So we really help people review the birds so that they can remember each day's event before the next day starts filling up their eyeballs.
You pretty much get your bird list in three ways. You get the nightly review via your physical list. You generate an eBird trip report with all of the checklists and share them if people want them to be shared. And then there's the trip list at the very end of the tour, which is fully annotated with species and taxonomic order. So you get these lists in every way that you need.
And of course, we do mammals and reptiles and amphibians as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we'll provide everyone with a spiral bound checklist. You'll have your own checklist for the tour.
Hello.
Anybody interested in butterflies?
So I leave on Friday for a butterfly trip to Mexico. We're going to see the wintering monarch butterflies. We have a couple guides at Naturalist Journeys that are unbelievable butterfly experts. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them, but we do everything. We try to pay attention to all the nature that we see, even though we tend to do a lot of bird watching.
Hello, Liz Stone. Hi, Carlos. We went to Belize and Spain with you and had a great time. I wondered what is going on in Brazil in the areas of the Pantanal that had wildfires back in 2020.
So fortunately, the Pantanal ecosystem, being a wetland ecosystem, those types of ecosystems are fairly resilient to burning. So they have since bounced back. So I was there last year and there was no visible impact on those ecosystems. I cannot say the same for the Amazon though.
Wow, thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions?
How's the food?
In the Pantanal, in Brazil, well, okay. So Brazil is, you usually get your feijão, which is beans, and you get your rice, and you get your farofa, which farofa is usually dried and granulated cassava flour. You get your tasty little pal de queijo, which is like these little cheese bread puffs, which are amazing, of varying levels of goodness. Some of them are much better than others, but when they're good, they're really good. Lots of meat, lots of freshwater fish in the Pantanal. Couvé, which is kind of like collard greens. You're not going to go hungry. In terms of Ecuador, it's quite different in some ways. They like to start off with soup, and they love putting popcorn in their soup. Sort of light soups, and then the food is very good, but it's rice. It's a lot of rice. It's plantains. It's a protein. It's at the lodges you will be going at mostly. It'll be stylized more for North American palates, though, so it's not quite as Ecuadorian as you'd think.
Biggest complaint I have on Naturalist Journeys tours, people are concerned they're going to gain weight. The food on all the tours I've been on is very, very tempting. Everybody wants to do seconds and thirds, and then they regret it afterwards. But I've always had really good food experiences on these tours. Well, I hope everybody will strongly consider coming to South America birding. It is the bird continent. There are 4,000 species in South America. Naturalist Journeys is currently advertising tours to 9 different countries, and they put Carlos on because these are 2 of the best tours that you can take in South America. Really whet your appetite for the entire continent. So, Carlos, great presentation. I really enjoyed everything you had to say about both places, and look forward to seeing everybody in the field.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation.
If anyone has any further questions, please reach out to us at travel@naturalistjourneys.com. That's the best way to get in touch. And if you're ready to book, you can send an email there as well. And any questions. Thanks again to Greg and to Carlos. And I hope everyone has a good night.
Good night, everyone.